Good morning and welcome to Business Over Brand Create to Generate Week. My name is Lee Levinson-Perrine. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at the Creative Affairs Office, and we are excited to welcome you to our first day of programming. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Maryann Lombardi, who's the Associate Director of the Creative Affairs Office, to take it away.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're thrilled to have you on our first Business Over Brand Day, our conversation on mental health. As Lee mentioned, my name is Maryann Lombardi. I run the Creative Affairs Office here in DC, and we're pretty excited about that office. It launched at the end of last year. If you stay tuned with us throughout the week, you're going to learn a lot more about the resources we provide, the content and the activities and our work. So I'm really excited to get to know you and let you get to know us a little bit. So please stay with us throughout the week and you'll learn more about it. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation on mental health with two of our friends and our colleagues and our experts. We have with us Dr. Mary DeRaedt, and we have Lanada Williams with us as well to help us through a conversation to talk about our mental health and how we can do better to protect ourselves and care for ourselves as we move forward in the world. So first and foremost, I want to introduce you to these awesome experts that we have with us. So good morning, Mary and Lanada. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Lanada, can we start with you? Do you mind letting people know who you are, currently where you practice, maybe the areas of focus, and how you got into this work to begin with?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I appreciate you all letting me join this conversation. It's so vital to the climate of what we're actually trying to coexist in right now. Mental health is at the forefront. I'm currently practicing at my private practice, which is Alliance Family Solutions. And I have been a clinician, a licensed psychotherapist. I'm licensed in DC in Maryland since 2010. Initially, what brought me to this work, and I think which was a vital piece of my own wellness, was just seeing the lack of understanding when it comes to the pedagogy around how we take care of ourselves. And I initially wanted to understand what my role was within spreading the information and understanding what type of leadership needed to happen within the fields around what it looks like for looking at and studying historical trauma, which is one of my research focuses, in talking about it from an aspect. We think about the civil rights movement. We think about different things that are historical benchmarkers for people of color, people geographically, and we only look at it as an historical event. But we don't take the time to think about the intersectionality of the people that were there, what happened with their feelings, their emotions, and what were the next steps. So what were the next steps when we talk about and look at the climate of Birmingham in Alabama, and when Birmingham was indicative of having the nickname Bombingham, which we don't take a second to step back, and then to look at how that affected the psychology of the people that were there, and then transgenerational trauma of what those stories look like, talking to their children, talking to their relatives, and then having to go back to the churches and the communities and not being able to have modality to be able to move out of those communities. And we only see them as historical markers. So I think that was one of the peaks of my research in thinking of how do we connect that historical trauma to what's currently happening in the climate of today. And that's with police brutality, with all the other things and issues that are occurring. So that was what initially sparked my interest. And I think as I did my studies and did different internships, just getting to know the DC area, I clocked my hours here, and I'm not a native, but I very much feel connected to DC as my home. And I think it's important that people are able to see people that look like them and love like them in different capacities. So a lot of the work I've done has been around the LGBTQ community, and also understanding how we're able to take in the different parts of us and also present our wellness. So I have also worked at the Department of Behavioral Health for over 7 years, and I've just been blessed and been able to be a part of this community for a very long time.
Oh, thank you so much, Lanada. It's really great to hear a little bit more about what got you started and what your passions are in this industry. Dr. Mary, can you help introduce yourself a little bit too, how you came to this work and the work that you're doing now?
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting us here today. I agree with Lanada. This is probably one of the most relevant topics. Mental health is so important, and I would say that my path to becoming a therapist was a little bit different. I started as a teacher, and initially was seeing for students, across the spectrum, just challenges in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, and realizing that they weren't able to learn, not because of a lack of intelligence or ability to learn, but mental health issues that were getting in the way. And so I went back to school and became a mental health counselor, and I practiced across the developmental spectrum in children, adolescents, and adults. I'm licensed in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Virginia. And throughout the course of that work that I started doing, I really became aware of the issues around trauma and the fact that trauma was very misunderstood. I started doing this over 18 years ago, and so at that time, trauma was just beginning to be explored and understood, and it became a passion of mine to help people really understand themselves and understand their process, and to see that kind of intergenerational pattern of trauma across the lifespan, and just try to help people understand that. And I also then came back to school to get my doctorate because I was driven to kind of expand my understanding, and my area of research became working with refugee populations and people who have been exposed to severe trauma and complex trauma around the world. And really kind of exploring the issues that they have and the challenges that they face and the long-term outcomes when trauma is not addressed, when it is kind of just suppressed. So at this point, I'm also on faculty at George Washington University. I am the director of the school counseling program and an associate professor there. And I teach students and supervise students through their clinical work. And that has kind of become a new passion of mine, creating therapists who are culturally competent and capable of providing effective services. And I also continue to practice, and I am practicing at the Gill Institute for Trauma Recovery and Education, which is out in Fairfax. It is an excellent practice where we're really able to provide services to multiple areas of the community, including DC and Virginia. So that's where I'm at.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I was hoping that we could start to talk about what does it actually mean to take care of your mental health, right? Like what are good mental health hygiene, or what's good mental health fitness, right? When we think about taking care of ourselves, what does it mean to take care of your mental health?
I guess I can start and say that there are a lot of things that go into taking care of your mental health from my perspective. One of them is to just be aware that it is something you need to address. I think quite often mental health is considered something that will just kind of come along, or it's there and it's healthy until it's suddenly not. And the truth is, it's like going to the doctor for checkups. It's like going to the dentist for cleanings. Mental health is something that you need to be consciously aware that you're taking care of, that you are doing things on a regular basis, whether it's daily, weekly, whatever it is, that you are consciously making an effort to improve and maintain your mental health. There are a couple different things that you can do just on a practical level, things like, exercising and setting aside time for meditation or prayer, having conversations with people about how you're feeling, engaging in social activities. I'm sure Lanada can add more to that. But I think the active seeking of your own mental health is something that is just an important aspect of that mental health in the first place as a starting off point.
And I agree. I think that one of the points that was just made was around how we view and how we engage and activate our mental health. And one of the things that I like to point out is you don't have to just go and seek mental health treatment when you're in crisis. That's the equivalent of using the ER for your basic everyday physical health. You don't just go to the ER to do a check-in or when you're in crisis. So you don't have to just use and utilize therapy when you're in a crisis. That is a misconception that you have to come when you are at the total end of whatever the experience is. You actually can start, and I think a part of your mental health, and when we talk about hygiene, we talk about what is your daily maintenance, what are the things that you are incorporating within your life. So mental health can start with check-ins that you're doing with friends and family. We don't equate them to the actual practice of going to therapy, but it is a wellness check-in. So the low-hanging fruit that we all can do is just understand what mental wellness is. And according to the World Health Organization, it's really defined as a state of well-being in which an individual is able to just actualize their abilities and also able to cope with just your normal stress. So if you're able to understand what your baseline is, what are your stress levels? So then once it goes beyond that baseline, and once we get into the area where it's 4 to 5 days, you're looking at what that spectrum looks like over the when you're qualifying it over a month, then you can understand when is your time to check in. So my crisis and when I want to see my therapist might be very different from yours. So you're able just to regulate. But the idea is we want to be able to contribute to your own mental wellness. And that takes us talking about this in these communal spaces and not in isolation. So we do check-ins with friends daily. We also need to do a check-in with ourselves and then start to think about what is your wellness plan? And that plan can be activated outside of crisis, and it can be activated as something just as a check-in, just to maintain your basic idea of what your wellness is.
So that's super helpful. I love this idea of making a wellness plan for ourselves. We hear this term self-care all the time, you know, and I'm curious what the relationship is or the connectivity between what self-care is and what mental health care is, and how all of these terms that we hear sort of out in the world have to do with each other, right? Like how we fit them all together.
Yeah, my perspective on self-care and how it kind of fits in is that is self-care is in many ways a part of that mental health hygiene, that, and you know, to use Lanada's term, the wellness plan, being able to know yourself and know what you need in a day-to-day, on a day-to-day basis, and being able to have access to things that allow you to take care of your mental health would be, you know, one definition of self-care. So I think it tends to get a reputation as like, oh, take a bubble bath or, you know, go get a pedicure. But I think, and those things can be really valuable. But I think when you take the time to know what you actually need in moment to moment, then you kind of can expand your understanding of what self-care is. Things like, you know, setting plans for the day might actually be a self-care activity, or taking time out of that plan might be what you need that day for self-care. But you need to be able to know yourself and be aware of what you need in some of those moments in order to make use of that.
I agree. I think that as we're talking about self-care, it can be very broad. So I think as we start to think about our own lives, to actualize and normalize that conversation, dividing self-care up into different categories. So what is your physical self-care plan? What is your emotional self-care plan? Giving it labels so that you can attend to it in a way that gives it a category, and then just talking about it. And if you're able to write it down, if you're able to do a check-in, but there might be things that you're already doing that are very helpful. So going for a walk, participating in yoga, taking deeper breaths. So there's a lot of things that you can do that don't cost anything. I think that's important to say. And there are things that you can allow yourself to budget for. So I think even allowing yourself to know that if you're in the financial space or not, if you're able to set aside some type of budget that is just for attending to these activities. And like Mary said, there are ways that, if you're getting pedicures, if you're doing things that just initiate your self-hygiene and your self-care, then you also can just step back and lean into those deeper. So maybe it's taking a longer bath. Maybe it's engaging in washing your face and doing a home facial, taking more time to do that. So really being intentional, I think, is about one of the things in the pillars of self-care. So having some intentionality around the tasks that you're going about in life, categorizing them and putting them into sections so that you can talk to yourself about what you're doing, so that when these are baseline activities, and that you can separate them from your everyday life. So taking a shower, that could be self-care if you're not taking showers daily. Now, we are in the pandemic. This is no judgment. This is a judgment-free zone. So, if you need to put taking a shower on your agenda because you're not attending to that could possibly be your self-care. So just making sure that if you're taking time to look at what you already currently are doing, and then making time so that you're forgetting that you're taking time to attend to your feelings and being intentional about these activities, and then extending them beyond the baseline of what you typically do.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying about that. And I think things like taking a shower and taking a walk can be very helpful just in and of themselves. But then you have this intentionality that you set, that it's a mindful, that it's a self-care activity. You could also play music while you're in the shower, or set an intention for your thought process in the shower or for the walk that either gives you space to distract from the day-to-day stress or gives you space to process the day-to-day stress. Because I think that's two different needs that we have as humans, right? Sometimes we need to kind of step outside of that stress and give our brain a break. And sometimes we need self-care to help us kind of think through and process what that stress is doing and what the outcome can be. So just doing day-to-day things that we do on a regular basis, but then setting an intention for those things can turn it into a much deeper and richer kind of taking care of self and emotional health as well as physical. I really liked too, Lanada, when you were saying like having a wellness plan for both physical and mental, and like having these different ideas about different aspects of self that we need to be taking care of.
Yeah.
Really, really fun.
Yeah, because I think sometimes we can become very siloed in our thinking, and we think that, okay, we can grow in one area, and we really can start to talk about wellness and expanding and growing in all areas of our life. And it doesn't just have to be one polarizing event. It can be different categories, and that gives people different points of access too. So if you are hearing this conversation and you're thinking that therapy or mental health takes you away from your spiritual care, then we can talk about how the intersectionality of all these things can come together, and we can start to not say either or, but how we can incorporate everything together.
Absolutely. There's so many aspects of things, like even just, eating, or like you said, spiritual care, or just all these different ways that our bodies need to be taken care of. And we can get so focused on one that we ignore all the others, and then we don't get that holistic perspective.
So where does therapy fit into this, right? Like where does therapy come in, and what actually happens in a session, and how does somebody find a therapist that might best fit them and their needs, and how are we able to make the best use of our time in therapy?
I think Lanada already kind of hit on, like, therapy is, when do we go get it? Generally speaking, it's not, like she was saying, it's not like, go to the ER for, a sniffle. But I think people use therapy in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's crisis intervention when we're at a difficult point and we feel really stuck. and we're not really sure how to move forward, or we're feeling hopeless and like there's no path forward, there's no way out, that is definitely a time to seek out a therapist, someone kind of outside of your day-to-day circle who can give you a new perspective and offer you a safe space to process what you're going through. I think sometimes people, though, can also use therapy as they have a specific issue in their life that they have recognized over time that it's a consistent challenge. And so they seek out a therapist to specifically target that issue, to go, this is something that I want to work through, I want to talk about, I want to dig into and understand myself and try to get some resolution for that. So I think those are two kind of different reasons to go to therapy, but there can also be just a sense of, I'm not sure what is happening, and I need to get some outside perspective. I need to understand what's happening. And so a therapist can kind of provide that for you, kind of as a starting point of when to go.
I think that's a great starting point. And I just wanted to support Mary, but saying that I think I can answer the second part of the question, which is, once you get to therapy, what are some of the questions that are recommendations that you can engage your therapist around? And I think that there are parts of by default, there's a hierarchy within the therapeutic setting that is indicative of some privileges that people don't feel like they can access at times. There is an idea that your therapist has a lot of education. There's a lot of different ways that we don't think about that these are walls and barriers to being able to advocate for yourself. And a lot of the research shows that some of these barriers kind of include this imbalance of power, and that can prevent people from asking questions. So I think just talking about some of the questions is really helpful. So I think a starting point is asking your therapist just what brought them to the work, like what brought them to the work, and what is their training, how long they've been in the field, what kinds of therapy do they typically practice, and if you want to understand the types of treatment that they prefer to offer. So there's a therapeutic lens that clinicians use as they are collecting data, collecting research, and the way they go about the process of therapy. So we talked about, we threw the word out, cultural and linguistic competency. So being able to understand if there is a physical difference, a perceived difference, then being able to broach and to talk about how this might come up. So if your therapist doesn't look like you, sound like you, love like you, then you can ask those questions. Are you, if you perceive yourself to be a part of a certain community, do you know about this community? And how do you approach this work? So the idea is that you want to understand, when am I going to feel better? And I think that we think that therapy, you're going to come, you see your therapist one time, this is it, problem solved. And I like to just throw that out there. This is a process. And it is very much so something that if you need to touch and feel and understand it, then when you're not hurting, it seems like you shouldn't come. So I tell people, let's manage expectations for just saying, let's come together at least once a week. So we want to talk about the frequency, the duration, and then how I can expect and know that there's results by talking about what your counseling goals are. So it won't necessarily sometimes be a feeling, but it will be that, hey, we wanted to talk about these things. Are we going to talk about these things? And I think the last thing that's super important is, how much is this going to cost? So the access to care and what that looks like. A lot of times clinicians are accepting sliding scale payments, but you want to understand how much this will cost, because attending to all of the things are a part of your wellness and being able to access and get inside of the care.
Yeah, I would add to that there is freedom within therapy, and kind of what you were saying about it being empowered as the client, as the person seeking services, to be able to say, this is what I need, or to explore what people offer to kind of get an idea of what you might need, because you might not even know what you need to start off. So giving yourself time to meet different clinicians. And also, I think there can be there can be a fatigue for people trying to explain themselves to a therapist that doesn't understand their experience. And so to be empowered as someone seeking services, that if you are seeking a therapist that fits for you, that understands your experience. I love what you just, the thing you just said, Lanada, about love like you, look like you. If you would like that therapist, then that is something you should seek, and try to find someone that gives you the space to feel comfortable and feel like you are understood. And the cost can be so prohibitive. It is, but there are a lot of options available for lower cost therapy. And I think, as Lanada also mentioned, there are therapists who may not advertise necessarily, but will sometimes take a sliding scale if you reach out to them and try to kind of seek services to them. I know quite a few private practitioners in DC who will take some clients on a lower scale if the need is there.
So both of you had mentioned therapeutic approaches, and I know that there are multiple different approaches to therapy. Mary, I wondered if you could mention a little bit about the approach that you guys have taken within the Care for Creatives program. For those of you who don't know, the Creative Affairs Office here in DC has partnered with George Washington University to create a pay-what-you-can mental health support program. And in this, it's called Care for Creatives. And when we respond and send you feedback from this session, for those of you who have RSVP, we'll give you a little bit more information about how you can access that program. But Dr. Mary created the protocol for that program. And so do you mind explaining how that works, but also in the context of a therapeutic approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, there are different theories, different modalities, where some of them are longer term, meaning that you're kind of in the therapy until the issue is resolved. And then there are some that have a standard set time frame and a structure to the sessions. And so what we've done with the Care for Creatives program is created a shorter term kind of crisis-oriented intervention that is from a solution-focused approach. It incorporates a couple of different aspects, including creative arts, which has been demonstrated to be an important aspect of kind of self-exploration and self-understanding, and a very cathartic process for many people, as I'm sure many people listening would agree. And so what we've done is we have created a space where you can kind of come in, and for 6 sessions, you explore kind of what's going on for you now. Then you dig into what are the strengths that you already have, the things that you have with you that you carry that you could use and make use of, and then kind of provide some psychoeducation around obstacles to change and obstacles to obstacles to change and movement forward. And then we kind of, as we move through that, we move into a little bit more of kind of understanding your space in this moment and what this process has given you. And then at the end of the process, your therapist will review with you options for moving forward. If this process was helpful and you're ready now to kind of go back to daily life and engage and use what you've learned, or if you need potentially a longer term approach and therapy over time would be a better thing for you, then we have referrals and sources for you to continue on in therapy and find a new therapist that will kind of give you that longer term approach. So basically the Care for Creatives program is very much on providing you with tools, looking at what you already bring to the table and celebrating who you are as a person, and helping you kind of bridge, making use of that to help you improve your mental health and help you improve your process through the crisis. I'm not sure if that explains it well, but that's what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's great. So that you're saying that's a solution based. Lanada, are there other kinds of approaches to therapy that people may find as they're talking and interviewing therapists, and maybe questions that they could ask to understand what another kind of approach might be?
Sure. There's a lot of modalities. I like to just say that. I'm going to just share a few that I am particularly fond of. And I think that solution focus is one of my favorite. I also know a lot about the pedagogy around person-centeredness, which takes a person-centered approach, and you're able to be the focal point and the director of that wellness and treatment plan, where your everyday language, your plain language, and what you would typically see as your problem gets to be on your treatment plan, and your clinician matches to that and gives interventions and techniques to be able to move you forward in the therapeutic process. I also would like to share that within the historical trauma view, and with the different levels of cultural and linguistic competency that we're all trying to approach, there are other types of racial trauma-focused models that help to alleviate some of the daily stressors that people might have or experience with having race-based trauma. So I think that one of the approaches that I like to use is the N2 approach, which is from an organization that's here in Washington, D.C., that's the Progressive Life Center, that's been here for over 20 years, that does a very good job of training clinicians. And that was one of my first psychotherapy internships, and that was understanding the N2 approach. And the N2 approach has 6 different characteristics that are based off of the idea that healing is a natural process. It gives an Afrocentric worldview and methodologies around the way of practicing, and also that N2 is a way of life, and it's pluralistic in understanding that mental health is the frame for a lot of people and the way they move throughout their life. And it also has a lot of different mind-body concepts that are relational based. And also you're able to understand that there's an essence that everyone wants to aspire to do well and to be well and to thrive. So that healing is a natural process. And if you're able to sit with the issue, the clinician is the guide and helps to frame that work, but you're able to heal. And the clinician is not helping you for that, but your healing is a natural process that you're able to experience. And that's what therapeutic process is, just manifesting and understanding what that means for you, depending on your cultural experiences.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
No, I think it's something, another way to kind of talk to your therapist about their approach and ask them is to find out if they take kind of a feminist or a relational cultural lens, which are 2 therapy approaches that are relatively open-ended as well as person-centered, as Lanada was just saying. But those 2 theoretical lenses that a therapist might use are steeped in the idea and based on the idea that people can live in an oppressed environment, and that oppression is a root of a lot of challenges. So they have a much more trauma-focused and deeper understanding of the kind of cultural pressure and racism and things that are affecting people on a day-to-day basis. So that those 2 might also be lenses that you could ask your therapist about.
Yeah. So what if it's not working out? Right? Like how do you break up with your therapist? Right? Like breaking up with anybody is hard, right? Like whether it's a friend breakup, whether it's a relational breakup, right? Just being able to speak your truth and say, hey, I need something different, something more. I'm curious what happens in that kind of environment with a therapist.
Yeah. Can I start a little before you're ready to break up with them, and just say that I think that sometimes when you're in therapy, there are so many dynamics that are going on in a therapy session, and you may be finding yourself not feeling comfortable or feeling like this isn't working well. And if that's the case, you obviously have the right to end therapy, and we can talk about how you do that. But I think that there is also an opportunity to share with your therapist to hopefully you have at least a trust enough to share with them that you feel like it's not working, that something is missing, and that can you talk about that if you feel comfortable doing that, and try to see if there's a way to change the dynamics that are occurring. But sometimes even that doesn't really work because not every therapist is going to be a good fit for every person seeking services. So it is very much important to understand that just because someone is a therapist doesn't mean they're the right therapist for you. And it doesn't mean that they're going to work well with you. So being very aware of your own reactions, your own responses, and whether or not the therapy is actually providing you what you need. And if you feel comfortable doing it, giving yourself the option to talk through some of that, maybe before you get to the point where you're ready to end. Would be my starting point. I think once you get to the point where you're ready to end, though, there are multiple ways to do that, and you can email your therapist, you can share with them in session. I know that Lanada, maybe you could pick up, and you had some really great, when we talked before, some really great advice about ending with your therapist.
Yes, I think that one of the things that I like that you highlighted that is like what happens before. And because we know that within relationships, there are so many things that happen before the breakup. And a lot of times I encourage couples, ironically enough, it is a very parallel process to being you are in relation. We're all in relation to each other. Mm-hmm. And what we don't sometimes do is create a feedback loop. In that feedback loop so that we can know that this isn't going well. So if you get to the end of your relationship, you had no idea that this was a breakup time, then really that's a cautionary tale of like what is happening, that there's not a built-in feedback mechanism that we're able to talk about this. So I think that you get to check in with your therapist each session to give a pulse of what's happening and to make sure that those therapeutic goals that we talked about are still the focal point of the sessions. I call it, we also know the terminology within the crisis world is a CAO, which is the crisis of the week. Yeah. The CAO is going to happen. So sometimes that deters us from being able to deal with those clinical goals. But the idea is that when you do have to break up and you do think that this is not moving forward, your job as a patient is to know that the therapist is holding a space for you. You're not holding a space for the therapist. So this does not have to be a lengthy process. It can be an email. It could be that email is sent so that the voice doesn't have to be tempered with, so you don't have to release that voice chakra to say what's going on. Those are totally fine and acceptable ways to move forward. But this is about you not interconnecting the therapy with the therapist. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, I stopped therapy. Oh, the therapist was terrible. And that is where we hit the wall. They never return. So just realizing that if you do have to break up with your therapist, if you had to, it's not a good fit, it's not working, the goals aren't being addressed, then my second part to that is to support you all with thinking about moving forward with a new therapist. Because a lot of times we think that therapist was therapy and that's our only experience. Yet we can move forward. And you can seek another therapist and just know that it's okay to have those transitions. It doesn't have to be this dichotomy of this is working or not working. There can always be some gray. And as we're moving forward, just taking those lessons learned, I would also encourage to talk about the transition with your next therapist. So at the top of the session, talk about what worked in therapy, what did not work. So you're giving that therapist the blueprint for what you need, because we're all still learning. And a lot of times therapists only know that it didn't work when you either ghost them, you never return. That's the only feedback therapists get. So just realizing that we are in relationship to each other. So you want to give someone the opportunity to change. And if that does not work, it's okay to transition. But when you do go to your next therapist, it would be a great idea to just share what you've learned, because therapy is a process. And then the therapist is there to facilitate that process, but you still have to do the work of getting and attending to your feelings and have a level of responsibility to yourself.
Yeah, I think it's something that I recommend to people all the time is if your new therapist, when you seek a new therapist, doesn't ask you, tell me about your prior therapy, right? If they're not curious about that and they're not wanting to know what has gone on for you before and what has worked and what hasn't worked, then I don't know, from my perspective, that's a warning sign that they're not taking into consideration your history with other people. But definitely if they don't, you can still advocate for that and bring it up and share it. And I like something that you had said before, Lanada, that if you want to end therapy and you're not sure what to do or how to end it, you can just disappear. You have that option if that's the safest thing for you. Because that is always, you are the person who is important in the situation. You are the one who gets to make those choices.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you guys so much. I know, Lee, you've got a couple of questions.
I do. First question, how do we assess what intentionality means in our mental health when in a point of struggle, we're tired and doing something that takes intentionality seems very exhausting? What are good tactics to interrupt this cycle of fatigue that leads to behaviors that contribute to fatigue?
Okay.
That's a really powerful question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm wrapping my head around all the layers of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can start, Mary, and I think that I really heard in that question that they're already tired. Mm-hmm. And the idea of setting an intention is just one more layer. And I think that when I use the word intentionality, there is a functional definition that might have more weight to it, because it might seem like this grandiose idea that we need to have this intentionality around peace and, have this existential moment, when I think being intentional for your day and keeping a perspective on what that looks like is just being okay with saying, I am tired. And my intentions are to take care of myself within this tiredness and not overextend and not overthink and overdo and overcompensate and get hypervigilant about what I need to look like. One thing that we couldn't really parlay or talk about is this role of social advocacy and what it looks like in advocacy care. And I felt like that was not to infer too much, but it can be very exhausting to think about where you are. And it's okay to partner with someone and mirror what the feeling is until you're able to move forward. So I think honoring where you're at. So I don't think that the intentions have to be positive all the time. You can say that I am sad, and just recognizing what it looks like and feels like when you're sad and knowing that's a first step. But partnering and getting to a therapist sooner than later is also okay. So it's okay if your intentions aren't always positive, but it is okay that we massage this idea of what intentionality looks like, so that the intention is, if you're sad, then maybe getting up and being out of bed is the intention for the day. I'm going to stay out of the bed and I'm going to be able to move throughout the space. So setting small intentions, and you can escalate them to larger ones, but the intentions don't have to be this euphoric idea of what intentionality means. It can be, this is where you are. And if you're tired, it's okay to be clear about that. Sometimes we have a socialization of being productive. It is also very stressful. So it's okay to admit when you're tired. Mary, what are your thoughts?
No, I absolutely agree. I think that there is a need. The idea that the intentionality is to give yourself space to be tired. That can be your intentionality. And giving yourself the space to be what you are in that moment, and the freedom to just be okay with that is a really powerful thing. I also think that kind of the idea of self-care, the idea of intentionality and mental health and all of that is almost, in my mind, precursor. It's the stuff we're doing when things aren't as stressful, so that when we get to the moments when things are more stressful, we kind of have these things in place to fall back on. And so when I like to think about it, when I am lacking in my intentionality, I have an environment and a social network and people around me, whether it's a therapist on call or a friend on call, that when I lose my intentionality, when I lose my focus, when I lose my ability to manage because life has taken over, I have these things in place already. I can call that friend. I can, reach out to the therapist because that's what they're there to do. A friend of mine was talking one time about doing yoga and saying that yoga has strengthened them, their core, to a place where they used to fall all the time, and now they fall a lot less because they've strengthened that part of them that needed to be strengthened to kind of keep their balance. And so I think when we do the mental health hygiene things on a regular basis, then we can have the freedom in the moments of stress and crisis to allow that system to kind of work for us and give ourselves the space to engage in the time we need to get back to a place where we can be kind of balanced, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Lee, any other?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, we've got some great questions. Hope y'all are ready for this next one. What are some suggestions to pivot how we would normally take care of ourselves and how we can also model behavior and words for our loved ones, senior parents, who are also impacted by the huge change caused by the pandemic?
So, I don't know, I think maybe the first thing that stood out to me was how do we help the people that are our parents and older people that are in our lives, maybe for personal reasons. But, I think that one of the things that we can do, and it was almost in the question, is modeling, is showing, is demonstrating, maybe even being verbal about the things and the ways that we're coping in front of people in our lives, not imposing on them what they need to do, or I'm doing this, so you should do it, but just kind of sometimes just making something overt that is normally kind of covert, showing someone what we're doing, talking about what we're doing to take care of ourselves, how we're processing things, can actually be a less directive and less kind of in your face way of helping other people kind of learn from you, or at least be exposed to new ideas and new ways of thinking. I also think there's a point at which we kind of have to accept the people around us for who they are and let them be who they are, and let them be in their own process, and realize that we are just on a different process than them, which can be the harder end of that, I think. But that's my first thought.
Yeah. No, I like that first thought. And I think that this is very simplistic. We're talking about therapy. I think it's okay that if you feel safe and you're currently seeing a therapist, it is advantageous that we're talking to the generations behind us and talking to our grandmothers and talking to our relatives about what it feels like casually that we are seeing our therapist. And this does not have to be an over disclosure as a plea for you must do as I'm doing. But I like that term. I was thinking something similar, Mary, like we can start to mirror what our experiences are. A lot of times there's a saying that says, like, sometimes we feel like we're looking through a window, and typically we're looking at a mirror. Like, people are looking to have a similar experience so that they know it's safe. So if you are seeing a therapist and you feel comfortable with disclosing that layer, like, yeah, I can't wait until I see Lanada this week. Lanada's my therapist. So just normalizing the idea that we can talk about therapy, but we don't have to talk about what happens within therapy. And we can remind people that the therapy is an occasion for your healing. It's creating an atmosphere and the conditions so that you're able to talk, because we're so busy. And I don't know if you all look at your schedules. I don't have healing and tapping in with my thoughts on my schedule. I only have meetings. But when I go to see my therapist, and I think it's really important that as a psychotherapist, I say that I have a therapist, and I go to see my therapist. And when I'm there, I'm not there in therapy mode. I'm there to practice in what I'm preaching, and also to partake in my own maintenance and my own therapeutic process. So I equate it to, would you trust a dentist that pulls their own teeth? Like, you really should think about the healing process is very, it's a circular process. And for all of us to be able to experience it, I think talking about it and making sure that we bring it up in casual conversations to create an atmosphere that just talks about what do you do to set aside time for your healing, and so that gets to be okay.
Yeah, there is such a stigma and a misunderstanding in previous generations of what therapy is and what it can provide and how valuable it is, and this idea that it's oh, you're crazy, go see a therapist. And so sometimes just, I love what you were saying, sometimes just hearing this person that they love and care about is in therapy can be maybe a pathway for them to rethink attitudes about mental health and how important it is.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Lee, what else we got?
Hold on, I'm back. All right, it looks like we have time for one more question. To answer someone's question, we will be sending out resources after this, and that will have more information about the Care for Creatives program. So be on the lookout for that email. So our final question is going to be, and Lanada, building off something that you spoke about, what self-care methods would you recommend for folks engaged in activism, where they are taking on the issues of many folks and still need the bandwidth for themselves?
That is really, I'm glad that we were able to talk that up, because I think we had some great conversations in preparation for this. And I think that the project that you all are currently doing is one of those outlets that can be utilized. But I think just to understand that it's okay to have a clear schedule of what this work looks like. And I think that there's a part of self-advocacy and social activism that is all-inclusive of just diving in and giving of every part of yourself. And if you're not at every protest, every rally, everything that is happening, then you feel like you're not doing enough. So I think having a value-based conversation with yourself and getting those principles on paper and taking some time to understand what is your values and how you participate within and interact with your values still gets to be according to some boundaries. And I think it's okay to set those boundaries very early off so that you are attending to sleeping, eating, and then taking a break. And doing that check-in for your wellness. We see a lot of our advocates that are doing this frontline work that are not acknowledging their burnout, and we're not having this mental health conversation. So I think what you all are doing today is really important. But just to be very clear, I think it's important to have a schedule that is set and that you're able to put things on your schedule according to your values so that you're able to take care of yourself. And a part of this work is knowing what your limits are and knowing that we can't get to the community if you're not able to take care of yourself. So one of my favorite quotes is, charity starts at home and then it goes abroad. So you have to take care of yourself in your place and anchor yourself in what is okay for you, and knowing that if you're at the point where you're not sleeping, you're not eating, this work, you're not going to be of use to us anymore, because you will attend to, not directly, but you will start to deteriorate. And that part of the work is not what we're talking about. We're really taking care of yourself in a very healthy way. So it's really crucial for people that are doing this self-advocacy work. So that was a great question.
Yeah, I would completely agree with everything you said. I think the idea that if you don't pour back into yourself, then you don't have anything left to pour out very quickly. And this is long-term work, and this is things that needs stamina, and we have to refill that stamina, and we have to make that a priority, or you won't have that kind of reservoir available to you to continue to give.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much. This has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate Dr. Maryann Lanada, you spending a little bit of your time with us this morning to talk about this. And I'm hoping that it will encourage more conversations to be had. I'm hoping I get to continue to talk to you all, because I feel better just, listening to you. I'm getting filled up just by, your advice and your thoughts. I also want to say thank you to Generator, which is a national creative economy incubator who is helping us put on this week of programming. They're fantastic. They have a bunch of programs all over the country doing amazing things, helping creative people build their businesses, access capital, and connect with each other. And we'll have information about them in the sheet that we send out after this session as well. So please let people know that these conversations are happening all week. And as Lee mentioned, you guys will get a one sheet for participating in this that gives you some tips and some takeaways based on the conversation today. So, so thank you all. Lee, why don't you take us out?
Hello. So thank you, Maryann Lanada and Maryann, for a great first day. Can't wait to see everyone tomorrow. The topic is District of Creativity here to help. So that's about all the government resources that are available for all the dynamic creatives in our city. Just thanks again. I'm just really excited for this week and for all the work that the Creative Affairs Office is doing. And as always, reach out to us. We're support for you. All right, take care. See you tomorrow.